What were the Bolsheviks? It's a very strange name. It just means, again in Russian, people of the majority. But really the Bolsheviks were a socialist, a working class party, a Marxist revolutionary party. The membership in February 1917 was somewhere between 8 to 10,000 depending on various accounts, but they were a small but nevertheless significant political party. The membership of the Bolshevik Party was overwhelmingly made up of young factory workers. And Trotsky and Lenin, when they came back from exile, argued that all the things that people had made a revolution for, i.e. democratic rights, an end to the war, which people desperately wanted, the achievement of decent conditions, the distribution of bread. I mean, for example, the Bolsheviks had a slogan, bread, peace and land. That was not an abstract slogan plucked out of thin air. It related to specific, real burning requirements that people had to fulfill at that time. And Trotsky and Lenin argued that it was only by the Soviets taking power, i.e. setting up a government made up of working people, and by throwing out the bosses, the factory owners, the banks and so on, that these things, democracy, the distribution of land to the peasantry, peace and bread, could be achieved.
But the majority of the members of the Soviets were supporters of the Mensheviks and the Social Revolutionaries. The Mensheviks and the Social Revolutionaries were in power in February, part of the provisional government, and that government passed a lot of laws guaranteeing political freedoms, pledged to introduce land reform and have general elections for a new parliament. Shouldn't Lenin and Trotsky have been more patient, waited for the provisional government to carry out their programme?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. At the time of February 1917, the main political party that dominated the Soviets was a party called the Socialist Revolutionaries and the Mensheviks. The Mensheviks were ostensibly, at least on paper, they were the same as the Bolsheviks. They were Marxist and Socialist. Social Revolutionaries, a lot of their members regard themselves as socialists. But in reality, all those laws that were passed, and on paper at least, Russia in 1917 was transformed from a despotic state to one of the freest countries in the world. But that remained a dead letter, because the Social Revolutionaries and the Mensheviks actually then passed the power to a group of ministers who were ministers backed by big business in Russia that retained links with the Allies, with Britain and France, which meant quite specifically certain question. The governments of Britain and France had given lots of loans to Russia. Tsarist Russia was in massive debt. So the first thing was that the British and French capitalist governments wanted Russia to stay in the war. So basically, although the SR party and the Menshevik party were ostensibly socialist, in reality they carried on a policy of keeping things exactly the way they were before. They said, yes, fine, right, you soldiers, you've won democracy, you're the freest people in the world, but you have to carry on staying in those trenches. And in fact, in June of 1917, they launched another disastrous offensive. They said, you can have bread, but we can't take the land reform forward. They said, they promised that they would at some stage, but in reality they dragged their feet, particularly because the landowners themselves were in massive debt. And if the big land of the states had been distributed to the peasantry, and you have to bear in mind just how vast and backward Russia was, you know, roughly 10 million people in cities, 100 million peasants in the countryside. If there had been a distribution of the land, the main banks, particularly the French banks, who had loaned money to the landowners and the bosses of Russia, were afraid that they would lose those loans, and they were unwilling to allow these reforms to take place. And Lenin and Trotsky explained all those things and explained the links between the provisional government and big business. And so none of these reforms could be carried through unless there was a workers' government actually established which broke the links with the capitalist system.
And what